My name is Mikey Mhenna. We have a packed panel, so we are going to be speaking quickly and moving swiftly through today's talk. This talk will be followed by Q&A at the end, so please have your questions ready. The subject of today's talk is Arts for Health in the Face of Climate Change. This is a conversation that is a part of the Community Jameel afikra COP28 Conversation Series, a collaboration that aims to amplify local communities, youth experts, and non-expert voices to foster a more inclusive and informed discussion and to build a forum for intergenerational collaboration and engagement around climate action. To listen to this conversation and other conversations on this series, please follow Community Jameel and afikra on social media and YouTube because it's a 6-part series and should be a lot of fun. I'm going to pass the floor to Claire for some more remarks.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Claire Darden. I'm a senior curator and culture lead at Community Jameel. Just to provide a bit of background, because I'm not sure how much everyone knows about Community Jameel. We're an international philanthropic organization that advances science for communities to thrive. At least we try. Today, we're delighted to host this Community Jameel afikra COP28 live conversation at the Jameel Arts Centre, and thank you very much for hosting us. Art Jameel is our sister organization. As an organization, we support scientists as much as creatives to understand pressing human challenges. You may have noted this conversation is a collaboration with the Jameel Arts and Health Lab, which was established in early 2023 by the World Health Organization, NYU, Culture Runners, and Community Jameel. Focused on overlooked and underserved communities, the lab aims to coordinate and amplify scientific research into the effectiveness of the arts in improving health and well-being. Leveraging data as well as artist-led advocacy, we are hoping to drive policy implementation across the 193 member states. This conversation would not have been possible without Open Mind project. So thank you very much also to Andrew Scott for his support. And just to introduce a bit more our subject. In fact, recent research projects have built a very strong evidence base for the positive impact of the arts on our health, both mental, physical, and well-being. Today's discussion will explore the role of art and arts organizations in responding to the climate crisis by shaping our values and behavior for years to come. In 2018, while installing 24 large blocks of century-old ice harvested from a fjord in Greenland outside of Tate, Olafur Eliasson said to The Guardian, and I quote, "In order to create the massive behavioral change needed to fight global warming, we have to emotionalize that data, make it physically tangible." Bringing us today to today's topic. How can arts be an instrument for a better health in the face of the climate crisis? Over to you.
Okay, I'm going to introduce the first two panelists. Nadia Christidi is a PhD candidate at MIT, researcher, writer, and arts practitioner. Her research looks at how cities that face water supply challenges are imagining, planning, and preparing for the future of water in the face of climate change, including LA, Dubai, and Cape Town. She also studies the role that art, design, and architecture are playing in the future imagining and future planning processes. Welcome, Nadia. Nadia and I are also really old friends. Stephen Stapleton is the founder and CEO of Culture Runner, founding co-director of the Jameel Arts and Health Lab, and the founding director of Edge of Arabia. He is an artist, a social entrepreneur, known for developing platforms for cultural exchange with the Middle East, with a particular focus on measurably improving health and well-being through the arts. Welcome, Stephen.
I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Marina Romanello, the Executive Director of the Lancet Countdown. Marina, you are also a climate change and health researcher at UCL. You trained as a clinical biochemist in the Universidad de Buenos Aires in Argentina, and you hold a PhD in biomedical sciences from the University of Cambridge, UK. Uns Kattan, you are Deputy Director and Head of Learning and Research at Art Jameel. You oversee learning strategy and programs at Art Jameel, from school visits, children's material, all the way to the Jameel Library. And as you were saying just before, I do feel we are cousins in some way. And finally, Dr. Nisha Sajnani, who could not be with us today physically, but who has recorded a little message for us. Nisha is a founding co-director of the Jameel Arts and Health Lab, as well as a co-founder of Arts and Health at NYU.
Great. Okay, we're going to start with the first broad section. Marina, this question is for you. The Lancet Countdown has just published its 2023 report. Climate inaction is costing lives and livelihood today, with new global projections revealing the grave and mounting threat to health of further delayed action on climate change. Could you tell us a little more about this report and the 5 key domains and some of the indicators providing the most up-to-date assessment of the links between health and climate change?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm sorry I'm wearing a mask, but better safe than sorry. So the Lancet Countdown, for those of you who might not know about it, is a big international collaboration. We bring together for global annual reports 114 scientists from around the world. And these are researchers that work on a broad range of areas, because we understand that climate change is the most fundamental health determinant of our times, and that tackling climate change cannot be done through a single lens. It requires a multidisciplinary approach, and that involves not only health professionals, but also economists, engineers, human scientists, politicians, and the arts as a fundamental aspect of our human being selves. This report is the 8th one that we published. And in this 8th iteration, we're seeing how the impacts of climate change on our health are growing across every one of the aspects that we monitor. And through new projections, we're seeing just how dangerous, even a 2-degree world, even if we manage to keep temperature rise to 2 degrees, the dangers that we would be facing if we don't urgently act to adapt and to reduce our emissions. And importantly, what we're seeing as well is that the way in which we're responding to climate change has been enormously unjust. So the countries that are at the forefront of decarbonization are generally high-income countries, generally countries that have financial resources, that are at the forefront of a new world economy, and that are enjoying the health co-benefits of that transition, whereas the low-middle-income countries are lagging, are still addicted to fossil fuels, to dirty fuels, and are suffering the impacts that come with that. So that's why we're trying to expose these data year on year to ensure that we really expose the inequities of health that climate change and our response to climate change are exacerbating, and to drive human-centered climate action, understanding that whatever is happening today at COP is fundamentally a talk about public health and our future.
Cool, great, thanks so much.
In 2019, WHO Europe published a major contribution on the role of arts in health. WHO's recommendation was based on the result of over 3,000 studies. And I quote, "The beneficial impact of the arts could be furthered through acknowledging and acting on the growing evidence base, promoting arts engagement at the individual, local, and national levels, and supporting cross-sectoral collaboration." The Jameel Arts and Health Lab is currently conducting research at the intersection of arts, health, and climate. I'd like us to hear a bit more from our friend Nisha, who couldn't join us. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to join this conversation. In line with the vision of One Health, which aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystems, the Jameel Arts and Health Lab has chosen to prioritize the role of the arts in responding to the health impacts of climate change as we collectively contend with the climate crisis as a health crisis. Our work in the area involves a review of current scientific literature towards the publication of a policy brief and the foundation of a new study. We've been conducting this research in combination with a series of listening sessions with diverse communities in which we've asked ourselves, why do the arts matter on a warming planet? What role, if any, do the arts and do artists play in responding to the health impacts of climate change? So far, these conversations have reinforced that climate science alone is not sufficient to motivate politicians and the public to act. That artists and arts practices can provide an accessible, emotionally engaging channel to personally connect with phenomena that are unpredictable, often difficult to comprehend, and that seem remote in time and space. An example of this can be seen in the Warming Stripes campaign, which is an engaging visual timeline of the rise in average temperatures for one city, region, or country over the past 100 years, created by Professor Ed Hawkins at the National Centre for Atmospheric Science and the University of Reading. But are climate artworks actually effective in getting a message across? The literature points to the role of artists in telling the story of climate change, working through that story, and changing the story towards a needed cultural shift. First, Laura Sommer and Christian Klockner at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology analyzed audience responses to 37 works of art at COP21 in Paris, including Ice Watch by Icelandic artist Olafur Eliasson, in which pieces of glacier that had broken off near Greenland were brought to Paris to enable a more personal, emotional connection with the meaning of climate change. They found that climate change art is capable of changing people's opinions as long as the message is hopeful, accessible, and gives people ideas for change. Of course, their study also looked into the negative emotions prompted by artworks. A more shocking piece of visual art, like Unbearable by Danish sculptor Jens Galschiot, in which a polar bear is impaled by the famous hockey stick graph, can, for example, cause people to react with anxiety, anger, or guilt, depending on their background and state, and may prompt questions like, what does this artwork mean to me or tell me? Does the artwork motivate me to a certain action? In a later study, they found that being confronted with climate artwork correlates to a temporary increase in climate policy support. Features of the artwork, such as theme, style, format, size, setting, and whether there's a participatory element, for example, relate to how strongly and which emotions are activated. In another study, art therapist Zoe Mula and colleagues from King's College London synthesized the literature surrounding the interconnectedness between arts and nature and their impact on the health and well-being of children and young people. 11 studies representing 602 participants from Hong Kong, Ireland, UK, US, and Australia indicated that arts and nature programs increased nature connectivity, prompted curiosity about environmental issues, and led to a potential decrease in eco-anxiety. Finally, in order to meet our climate targets, we really need a cultural shift, a change in the stories we hear, see, and tell ourselves about our role within a greater ecosystem and our capacity to work together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The Arts and Climate Initiative and Culture Declares Emergency are examples of artists inspiring local and global coalitions of changemakers. In another example, filmmaker Lael Carmago and feminist climate podcaster Themali Kodikara launched Good Energy, a playbook for screenwriting in the age of climate change, which covers everything from the importance of telling climate stories and the intricacies of climate character psychology to ideas for depicting solutions on screen in ways that are entertaining, relevant, and authentic. Do the arts matter on a warming planet? The science is promising, and we look forward to sharing our future findings with you. Thank you.
Super interesting. My next question is for Uns. Art Jameel is a founding member of the World Weather Network, a worldwide network of artists, writers, and communities reporting on weather and climate since 2022. Could you tell us a little more about how this initiative and the way in which the network, this network might tackle the question of mental and physical health as well as well-being?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And it's really interesting to build upon sort of the comments that Marina made, Dr. Marina made, and Nisha as well. And I think what I really want to highlight as well is the role that the institution can play. and real sort of community engagement examples that I hope I could share with you as well during our time today. Coming on to World Weather Network, we are one of 28 different organizations that are based everywhere from sort of the marshlands of Iraq to the Great Salt Lake in Utah, reporting from weather stations on sort of subject matters that tackle the importance and the urgency of climate shift as well. It is a collaborative project that I think is very indicative as well of the way that we like to go about our work. And it's the perfect opportunity, as well as we touched upon earlier, of artists coming together with scientists and ecologists, because I think more and more as well, considering the conversation that we're having today, it's quite clear that the environmental reality and challenges that we face are not separate to the social, to the cultural and political. And that's where we kind of see our role fitting. Now, the way that the project actually manifests is quite interesting, and I really would urge, especially for those listening online later, to check the website, because it really kind of promotes original research and content as well by artists and writers. The way that we've tackled it is by tackling the subject of relative humidity, which is kind of a marker of our region here. We've managed to translate that into air-to-water generators that you would have seen in the building here that are based in the Jameel Arts Centre desert gardens that we have that make safe, drinkable water for our visitors, but that also kind of let you gather insight into humidity as well. The other thing that the team has been working on here at Jameel is a narrative podcast of these subject matters, looking into the idea of threshold, sweat, labor, techno-futures as well. So how do we kind of bring all these subject matters to the forefront of a collaborative force? We were able, through the project, to really harness attention into weather conversations, into kind of climate urgency aspects through the work of Emirati and UAE-based artists as well, in collaboration with the whole network. So it's ongoing until 2024, and there's hopefully quite a bit still to kind of explore there.
Amazing.
Over to you, maybe Nadia. As a PhD candidate, well, you'll soon be not be a candidate anymore, inshallah. In the Anthropology of Science and Technology at MIT, you study how cities that face water supply challenges will be impacted by climate change, and how they are imagining, planning, and preparing for the future of water. And I was quite intrigued by the level of imagining that you're referring to. Could you tell us maybe a bit more about your research and how it is that it might be connected to our subject matter?
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so a couple of things. I'll just start off in the beginning maybe by talking about my research very briefly, and then talking about the role of art within it. So as Clea mentioned, I look at how cities are planning for the future of water. A lot of this is about how climate change is radically impacting cities' water supplies, and therefore kind of leading to a need to rethink the way things have been done, in some cases for over 100 years. And I'm really interested in this question of transitions in general, whether that's, oil to post-oil, or different approaches to water. And I'm interested in the creative work that's going on in that. And I think that that includes engineers and policymakers, but also artists. And so as part of my research, I look at a particular type of artwork, which is called, these two curators in the late 1990s described it as ecoventions, which I really like as a term. And it kind of combines ecological and intervention. And they're usually large-scale projects that are very utilitarian. They make proposals for things to do in the world, or actually do them. And they tend to kind of intervene into the local environment to heal it somehow, or remake it in a way. And I'll give maybe one example from my research so that you get what I mean. So there's a project I look at in Los Angeles, which is by a studio called Metabolic Studio. The project is called Bending the River Back into the City, or in the city. Basically, if any of you have kind of lived in a city that has an urban river, oftentimes in the 20th century, what happened was because of flooding problems when it would rain, rivers got channelized. So they, were put into like this cement straitjacket, and that cut them off from their surroundings, but also really helped in flushing out the water as quickly as possible. So today, what that leads to is a complete disassociation of these rivers from their surroundings, but also water leaving without being used. And so this artist came up with this idea to kind of siphon off a part of that water, clean it using trees and soil, which have natural cleaning properties, and then using it to irrigate parks that are in what was historically the river's floodplain, so areas that were flooded and irrigated by the river. And it actually is a project in process that's taken many, many years and actually has finally secured over 90 permits, because that's how many organizations are involved in doing something like this. And it's pretty incredible because I think it utilizes the kind of flexibility and openness to experimentation in the arts, kind of the interdisciplinarity that the arts has a natural tendency towards, the lower barriers. I think it's able to get these 90 permits because it is an art project. And it's this incredible pilot that I think is very inspirational in allowing us to rethink things or do things differently. And yeah, so these are the kinds of projects that I find really exciting. And I think that there's a lot of potential for the arts to do little interventions like these, but also work with governments and scientists and larger communities to take that pilot scale project and maybe make it possible at a larger scale. So I hope that.
Thank you, Nadia. Another one for you, Marina. This year's report launches just weeks before the COP28, which has a health focus for the first time. The findings underscore the opportunity of a lifetime for COP, and that COP could help deliver through commitments and action to accelerate a just transition. What space do you see, and you've tackled this a bit before, but what space do you see for the arts in achieving this goal?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we want to embed health considerations into climate change and climate policy making, it's fundamentally because that's the most human component of climate change. It's the human face of climate change. There's nothing more human or more important to us as human beings than our health and well-being, understanding that health is not just about disease, but it's actually about socioeconomic determinants of health. It's about healthy living, healthy lives. So we try to humanize and to bring back the humans into the conversation. I try to do this a lot when I teach. If you Google climate change and you go to Google images, only now you're starting to find human beings in those images. By and large, you see polar bears, you see scorched soil, and you see leaves. For some reason, you see tons of leaves everywhere. But you don't see people. So we've kind of detached ourselves from the climate change conversation as if it's something that would happen in the year 2100 to a polar bear. And no one really cares. But we do care what happens to us, what happens to our day-to-day lives, what happens to the people that we love, to our children, to our families. And that is why embedding the health conversation is so important, because everything we do for climate change is fundamentally the most important public health intervention of our times. And there is where the arts come to play. The arts tap into the most human fibers of our being. It connects us with not only what surrounds us, but also what matters to us. And in humanizing climate change, being able to express the human dimension of climate change in a way that matters is fundamentally important. As I said, it's 8 years that we publish these annual indicator reports in The Lancet. I could tell you 10,000 numbers that will mean very little to you. But as soon as we put someone in front of you, a story, a human story that could be told through the arts, then that is where we tap into your fibers, where we start waking up the concepts of climate change and health that is fundamentally the big determinant of our well-being and everything that matters to us. So in helping us get that message through, we won't do it through publications in a scientific journal, but we can do it through artists, and we can do it through those that can actually engage with the human dimensions of climate change.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, Mikey, you might have another question for Stephen.
Yeah. Okay, so Stephen, there is a report that just came out, or came out from the Jameel Arts Health Lab. That's a policy brief on the impact of arts on health when facing climate change, apropos. Can you tell us about that report?
I can't. It hasn't come out yet.
Okay.
It's-
Bum, bum,
it's-
bum.
We're working on it. First, I want to say this is my first COP. I'm sure some of you here, it's your first COP as well, and it's also my first time speaking in the Jameel Arts Centre, and I was actually on the jury for the architectural competition for this many, many years ago. So it's personally and professionally a nice moment for me, and I want to thank you for inviting me. And I also want to thank Open Mind Project, because Andrew, you missed a recognition of your support to this Andrew Scott from Open Mind Project. You came late, like many, because of Sheikh Zayed Road is all blocked up, but thank you very much for your support. Before I get into the report, I just want to recap the model of the lab. So the lab is set up in three kind of areas. One is research, led by Dr. Nisha at NYU, and this is measuring the impact of the arts on health rigorously, something that the arts community very seldom does. They often do it anecdotally. Outreach, which is me, so I'm events, storytelling, that power of the artist coming into the model. And then the third is policy, which is led by the WHO. And ultimately, research coming together with outreach, we believe, can drive policy in a way that research can't do on its own. And one of the values of the lab is that we try to break those silos between the research community, the arts community, and the policy community. So I'm really grateful that you asked me, the arts lead, about the policy brief. So firstly, people might assume, oh, you know what a policy brief is, but actually, me coming from the arts, I didn't actually know exactly what a policy brief was. So just to explain, this is one of the sort of deliverables of the lab. It's a short brief, 5 to 7 pages. It's usually a PDF. It has a high-level overview. It'll include a model, most importantly, a call to action. This is the kind of thing that during COP, if you're a Minister of Culture or Minister of Health, you get this brief, you read through it, you decide if you're going to act on it. We're working on this at the moment, and we're looking at the brief under 3 main areas. The role of the arts in helping people adapt to climate change. It's coming. A lot of people are facing it right now. How can the arts help, for instance, arts therapies with eco-anxiety? We're seeing a lot of issues in mental health amongst young people who are bombarded with this nihilistic and apocalyptic view of what's going to come. And the arts therapies, not just for children, but from adults, can help with that. The second is obviously communication. This is where normally policymakers, they always think arts is just health communication. Get an artist, do a mural, communicate a health issue. I see something really, really profound in the role of the arts now. I think the arts has an incredible convening power, a unique convening power to bring together policymakers and scientists and artists. But I also think that if there isn't that emotional connection with the subject from the policymakers, things are not going to change. And the last thing that we're looking at is mitigation. And this is really arts institutions, and this is a very good example here. How are they going to change their operations? The art world ships art all over the world, flies business class all over the world. It's billions and billions of dollars getting circulated. How is that industry going to change? How are those structures going to change? So this report that we're working on, that we will probably release in about 6 months, through the unique model of the lab, we have the chance to get this in the hands of 193 ministers of health, ministers of culture, ministers of energy, ministers of environment. And we're very proud of that model, being able to do that. And I'll just end with this, which is we're trying in our reports to invite artists to be part of how we present the data. These PDFs that get banded around on WhatsApp, can be reimagined. They can be not just the format itself, it could be a PDF linked to a website, linked to a film, but also we know Mona Chalabi, for instance, an artist that we work with, incredible artist that can translate complex data into a way that audiences will relate to. So we're hoping to innovate in the field of these policy briefs that get in the hands of policymakers, both in terms of what's in it, but also in terms of the format. So sorry it's not out yet, and we can't distribute it, but that's my little summary. Thank you.
Cool.
Now everyone's expecting something really great. I hope it will look fantastic. But one for you, Uns, you're deputy director and head of learning of one of the major cultural institutions in the region. Now, what role do you think cultural institutions can play? And please do say to Stephen, not all of them fly business. There's a strong expectation here. Over to you, Uns. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, wow, that needs a whole panel on its own, I think. It's sort of an extreme privilege in a way as well to assume the position that we assume, but also a great responsibility comes along with it, because if you are talking about sort of free, open access to the community and being community-led, then these very subject matters are at the very center of our thinking. And that sort of also goes hand in hand with lifelong learning, which is something that we think about quite often here. So I think to take a step back, it's really important to walk the walk as well. And we wanted to very much start at home as well in that sense. So I would say over the past maybe 3 to 4 years as well here, particularly at Jameel Arts Centre too, we've been really putting this subject matter at the forefront of our thinking. Part of it has been sort of actions that we have taken in terms of looking at our own sort of greenhouse gas emission and running audits and monitoring and seeing where we can improve in that sense. So there's first and foremost different layers of responsibility. There's the responsibility that falls on you as a player in the sort of in the ecosystem, in the arts ecosystem, and as an entity. And then, of course, there is great responsibility towards those that we work with. So the way that we work with creatives and the way that we support creatives happens through exhibitions, commissions, and research primarily. And maybe a few examples that I can give as well of how we kind of were able to harness some of these conversations was some of the recent exhibitions that we had was, for example, An Ocean in Every Drop that was curated by Noura Razian that looked at sort of the the relationship of water and the human element of it and the aspect of ritual there. Staple, What's on Your Plate was the title of another exhibition, a group show that we had in Art Jameel, which is our other space in Jeddah. And that looks at the way that sort of food politics are at the forefront of sort of our day-to-day life as well. And we actually inaugurated the center with Crude, which was another exhibition that looked at petro-modernity in the region. Now, this is from an aspect of an exhibition-making situation. And of course, it kind of bleeds down and seeps through the organization, because anything that we sort of put out there that is accessible to the public is then also made available to the student groups that we interact with, the learning materials that we create, the workshops that we do, or the symposia that we lead. Some of the symposia that my colleagues have been working on here as well include Shifting Earth, which again looks at botany from the region. I see my colleague Nadine, who is sort of our plant expert in that sense, who has been working very carefully with a biannual as well artist garden that we have in the space here. So we're really trying to kind of turn the thinking on its head. How can we kind of showcase work as well that is beyond the white cube as such? How can we engage the community? My colleague Dawn Ross, who's in the room too, has recently spearheaded a fellowship actually that considers collection care from the region. And I think you had mentioned this earlier, Stephen, in terms of how we go about conserving the work, the artwork that we do, and how we sort of, a lot of these standards were also kind of set from a very Western and Eurocentric methodology as well. But the reality of the Gulf and where we showcase work and where we conserve and sort of work is quite different. And I think as the world as well itself is really, undergoing this increase in temperature that's changing all over the world in that sense. So, that will award fellowship of original research from the region about how we tackle issues of collection care in a sense. But I guess I wanted to end as well within the real aspect of community work that could happen here. Some of the things that we have done, we've just wrapped up our annual sustainability festival called Down to Earth. And I think if an institution does not respond to these urgent subject matters, then it's really, it's a prime responsibility. And not only did we kind of do that, but, in the forefront of thinking about, the tragic violence that is happening, we dedicated that platform to be twofold of the issue of sustainability, but also the issue of solidarity with our colleagues in Palestine. So it's kind of constant multi-layered complexities in that sense. There are grant possibilities as well that were made possible through our partnerships with sort of government and non-government. So something that we're doing here right now, just talking on how we're building on research, is research practices and platform grant that was made available with the Dubai Culture and Arts Authority, in the sense of allowing artists and entities to conduct research about climate from the region as well, and thematics that answer to that. So I think it's really multi-layered, but the way that we hope to go about it is integrate it into the very core of all the different areas that we try to kind of work through.
Thank you, Uns.
Okay, Nadia. You've collaborated with a lot of different organizations, organizations like JWAFS, as well as TBA 21 and Art Jameel. Bridging science and art is obviously part of your work. So how can artists engage in climate change advocacy, and how can it actually impact global health?
Okay, thank you. So I think, so going back to what I was saying about ecoventions, I think that the main problem is not necessarily awareness or concern. I think we all have a lot of awareness and concern that there's a problem. The main problem is going from concern to action. And I think that some of that is because it feels very overwhelming. The problem feels super overwhelming. Like climate change feels so big and so much bigger than me. And then, the systems that have produced it feel very overwhelming. I don't know how to intervene into them and to change things that have been happening a certain way for over 100 years. So I think one of the ways, and the reasons why I'm so drawn to ecoventions, is just because they provide like a way to bite into the problem, right? And to start working towards a solution. So I'll give another example, which is this time from the UAE, which is the Wetlands Pavilion that happened in the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2021, I believe. And this was a project that was curated by Wael Al-Awad and Kenichi Teramoto. And the idea behind it was basically that Portland cement produces a lot of CO2. We need to find a solution to that, especially as we need to construct more and more because of projections on population increase. And so after much research, they found that they could potentially use desalination brine, which is often, it's the salty byproduct that gets produced from desalination that gets returned back into the sea and potentially causes problems with coastal marine life. So they found that they could potentially use desalination brine to create a salt-based cement. And I think it's really interesting. It's a technological solution, which is great, but then the question becomes, and then what, right? How do you then take this salt-based cement and make it actually replace Portland cement. And the problem is, again, we're talking about a very big system, right? Like Portland cement determines how we build, our building regulations, where things are produced, trade relations, so many things. And I think that that's kind of some of the space that that we need to be thinking about. And I think the curators of this project are also thinking about this, right? So really, I think involving, and they're working with the government to think around some of that. So I think it's interesting to think about the space potentially for artists to be thinking about not just technological change or technological solutions, but also like social systems and how we can rethink them. Because I think what's needed, and sometimes what we get stuck in is the techno fix, right? Like, and the techno fix also helps us be like, oh, well, we're going to find a technology that's eventually going to solve the problem, and we don't actually have to do anything. And it's either like panic or techno fix, I feel, right? And techno fix also produces a certain kind of like complacency, which is a problem. And so I think, you know, it would be nice if, I think one of the ways that artists can intervene in this is to think about like real critical socio-technical transformation as opposed to techno fixes. And there's a lot of room within artworks to do that because of the kind of, you know, community-based, collaborative approaches that are possible.
That's a great name for a band, Panic or Technofix. If anyone wants it, I highly recommend.
So we were actually envisioning we would have another round of questions, but conscious of time, sure. I was wondering if we might give you guys the floor, and maybe over to you, Mikey, too.
Yeah. Let's open up to questions. Please speak quickly. If there is a question in particular for Dr. Marina, let's start with those because I think you have to go quite soon. I want to open up the first question to, I think, Dalia. Where is Dalia? Cool. I'm going to pass you the mic, or I'm going to hand a mic around. Dalia is a youth ambassador of sorts. So if you could introduce yourself formally of Community Jameel, that'd be great.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. Hi, dear panelists. It was such an interesting discussion. My name is Dalia Atalla. I'm a youth ambassador for Community Jameel at COP28. I actually had two questions. So I'll go through them very quickly. First of all, as a young woman from Lebanon and human rights and international security advocate, as well as master's students, I would like to bring up the role of climate change in exacerbating violence against women and girls in various countries, including mine. So in fact, just recently, the United Nations Environmental Program released that 80% of people displaced by the climate crisis are women and girls. And moreover, the World Health Organization and several leading health organizations unilaterally view violence against women as a public health crisis. So considering the above and taking into account the fact that in Lebanon, for instance, financial dependence is a critical issue because it traps women in cycles of violence, how can the arts serve as a transformative force not only to empower but also economically emancipate women, providing a pathway towards healing and well-being? So how might the convergence of art for its intrinsic value but also as a means of economic empowerment create a bridge towards healing arts? And the second question, very quickly, it's thinking about data collection and scientific knowledge. In this space, it's a critical step to informing policymaking. So when considering indigenous oral histories and know-hows, how can we creatively quantify this kind of knowledge to make it more accessible and showcase its concrete impact in addressing climate change? Thank you.
Okay, we're going to have the panel respond to this, and then I'll take 3 questions at the same time. So think of your questions. Who wants to address that?
Maybe Dr. Romanello, since we will have to leave us soon, if you would like to say a few words in response to what Dalia was asking, and then we'll release you.
Excellent. Yeah, and I apologize. I have to leave. The traffic is hectic, and I had to be somewhere else, so I won't make it otherwise. So that's an absolutely crucial point. A few years back, we tried to quantify the gender dimensions of climate change and health, and try to quantify how climate change is exacerbating the impacts, the disproportionate impacts on burn studies borne by women and children. And we found that we could not do that because we're not even collecting the data. So the data, if anything, we have it sometimes disaggregated by sex, sometimes in general it's by demographics, by gender, almost never. So we really struggle to capture it. And if you don't monitor, if you don't quantify it, you don't know how to address it. So that is a fundamental policy that needs to be implemented in the way that we're capturing data that we're monitoring the evolving health impacts of climate change and the health impacts of the response that we're giving to climate change, we need to do that through a gender lens, through a race lens, and through the race of any other minoritized communities, because otherwise we'll never be able to tackle the problem, and if we don't do a transition that is just, we won't give a healthy transition. That's to start with. The other issue that you raised that is crucial as well has to do with migration. And there as well, we really struggle to capture climate-related migration. We know it's happening, but the problem is attribution of the migration that we're seeing to climate change is enormously difficult. So you will see all sorts of numbers thrown around about migration and climate change. But the one thing that we know is that climate change will increasingly make more and more parts of the world either unlivable or areas where people don't want to choose to live in. And so people will have to face a choice. Either they stay where they are, or they choose to live, if they're privileged, or they don't even have that choice, and they're forced to remain in a place where they don't want to be. But one way or another, we have to, A, try to prevent that from being the case, try to enable people for living healthy lives in the place where they want to live, and on the other side, enable just transition that also takes into account just migration and protection of migrants and refugees. And that has a lot to do with that gender lens that you mentioned, because we know that women and children represent the biggest bulk of migrant communities, and that they are also the ones most vulnerable to violence and to other health hazards during the migrants' kind of the migration itself and at their points of destination. So just to say, absolutely, there's a huge, huge gap, not only in the policies, but also in the knowledge that is needed to inform those policies.
Excellent. So if we can get some hands, if there are some questions, we'll take a few at the same time.
Just a quick thank you to Dr. Romanello for joining us today. Thank you so much. We were delighted to be able to host you today, and thank you for coming all the way down to the Jameel Arts Centre. It means the world to afikra, Community Jameel, and Art Jameel, I'm sure. So thank you.
Great.
Any other questions? Yeah, sure.
Let me give you a mic just because we're recording this, so.
I just wanted to add a little bit to what she said. I'm coming here from Singapore. I'm a senior lecturer at Nanyang Technological University there. But anyway, also the asylum laws were all made after World War II, and they don't even consider climate as an issue. So being displaced because of climate, you know, there's no violence against you. There's no real perpetrator. It's the weather. It's the erosion of, you know, the warming of the oceans, the rising of sea level. So this is a real crisis issue, I feel, and especially looking at the U.S. border. Indigenous people are there. Having been displaced from Mexico, and they have really no grounds. So their lawyers are trying to take the policy that is there and try to manipulate it for their needs. So I just wanted to add that bit of crisis.
As we wait for questions, I have a question for the three of you. Is it let's start with Stephen, then Nadia, then Uns. Okay, so is it that folks in the art world, all define that capital A, capital W, do they know that this is a problem? Or is it just a small group of people who are in collaboration with each other and working together and studying the nature of rivers and this and that? Or does everyone know it's a problem?
Wait a minute. What the problem is? Climate change?
Yeah.
Or the fact that we can't communicate the issues?
Both.
Yeah, this is like one of my pet subjects I like to talk privately about. You know, I put it like this. If you could unleash the power of the imaginative power of the arts and creative communities worldwide, that could be the missing piece of the puzzle to changing behavior. So let's think about it positively, because it's easy, and world champion at being negative about, the art world, which, you're right to say something, from the 80s or the 90s, something emerged in the art world, which was full of money. It was full of events. It's a very powerful circle of people, museum boards. Are they engaged in this? I would say not that much. But think about the art world as a network and a community of creatives and creative professionals worldwide. That is the imaginative power of our planet. And if anything, we're facing a crisis of imagination, because without that big leap of that we could solve this, people are not changing their behavior. Even the policymakers are not changing their behavior. So I think it's a huge opportunity for the art world and arts institutions, but unfortunately, I don't know how you mobilize that. Someone else.
That's a really good question. Maybe on a more redeeming note, something that sort of emerged during these past few weeks in conversation was actually through our youth assembly program. So that's kind of self-led program. Every year we reach out to kind of high-achieving creatives based in the scene to kind of invite them to intervene within our centers, programming, exhibitions, and sort of have a say in their own kind of generational interests. And against the backdrop of COP these 2 weeks, one of our assembly youth members, Toga Tahir, is actually running a youth convening that looks into climate urgency, but also solidarity in that sense. And it's a really, this is an example of a project that is entirely self-led, that kind of mobilizes grassroots organizations in the UAE. I was actually really surprised to see how many groups are participating that are entirely new, that I personally didn't know about in the UAE, that sort of tackle the subject of sustainability and sort of the impact on lifestyle. And this is, the event is happening here on the 7th of December. And it's open to ages 16 to 30. So it's been really heartwarming. Another aspect of it as well, I was just talking to my colleague Dawn about sort of the collection fellowship that I just mentioned. And, this is sort of we thought it would be a very specialized response, a niche kind of, aspect of involving professionals who want to work within collection conservation within, sort of the global south as such. And I think the import of application has been sort of more than double what we've estimated. So that's another great indicator that actually these conversations are happening on sort of community levels, but also within specialized professionals as well. So I think, it's been quite surprising and exciting.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to say I totally agree with you about the crisis of imagination, and I think that's like why I'm so drawn to these eco-conventions. But that's to start with, and just I'll plug in here a quote that I love, just because I like to say it every time I get a chance to, which is a quote by Frederick Jameson, who says, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism." And I kind of think we can also say that in terms of climate change, like it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine a solution to climate change or solutions to climate change. So that's one thing I would just say. And then in terms of like the art world, yes, there's a lot of creative potential, I think. I also agree with you on that. And I think some of the problems of why that creative potential hasn't been like completely, I guess, tapped into has to do with art world still being relatively marginal. And I think we can work on building networks in order to make the impact wider. And I think it has to do a little bit with like the exhibition model, right? So there's a biennale or an exhibition, a one-off project that kind of then disappears, and we need more long-term engagement. So I think, things we can do is like embed artists in governmental institutions, have art institutions like leverage their networks in order to make real meaningful change. Rethink the exhibition and like production or funding model and stuff like that might have greater impact.
Yeah.
I would just add that, these silos that have emerged, they weren't always so. The arts and the science and the decision makers, if if you look back in history of society, it's relatively recently that we separated them. And something in the lab that I personally have loved is this kind of infiltration into a policy community, into a science community, and everyone has their language. I go to those conferences at NYU. I don't know what they're talking about, but they have their kind of their visual language, and if the art world could step out of itself, I think they would find welcome collaborators in these other worlds. Yeah.
And if they could open the door to let people in.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a two-way street. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to maybe pass over to you, Antonia, if you had a few words that you would like to make to the audience.
Oh, thank you so much. Only if we're...
Yeah.
Well,
For sure.
just to say, thank you. It's really amazing to have 3 different Jameel entities working together. It's our first time, and together with a really dear friend and fellow cultural activist as well. So thank you so much to everybody. Yeah, I only just wanted to say a very brief plug that we have our own ecovention outside, which just finished. I don't want to say at what time this morning or last night, but you'll be the first to have a tour of it. And Adib Dada is here, the other Dada who created Tarabot, a living forum outside. And yeah, we have this nice saying that Danny's been saying, we have a living forum that's just coming to life and will be coming to life over the months to come. So I'd really just like to invite everybody after this session just to take a wander outside. Adib, are you up for that? Just to give a few words about a really extraordinary commission that's trialling a lot of new materials, all developed in the UAE, some through Tashkil. Actually, I see Lisa here as well through the projects that you've been doing. And yeah, really pioneering a hugely ambitious project for us, working together with you. And I think Dalia is here as well. So, and other people on the project. So thank you for that. Please have an explore of the Jameel after this.
Great. Amazing.
Yeah, so before I share closing remarks, just one thing, just to be completely clear. You've come all the way down from COP or whatever place you were staying at. Please do visit the Jameel Arts Centre now that you're here. Take this opportunity in, out, garden, playground, exhibition, library, restaurant, everything. Because it will improve your health and well-being. Yes. Or else just go and see Antonia. So just to close on the research. And policy and COP28, obviously. There is growing data, and I know that not everyone knows about it, but there is growing data on the health impact of climate change. As we do, obviously, collectively understand the climate crisis as a health crisis and as a society crisis. Artists can provide a comprehensible response to ensure a cultural shift. As more and more studies do prove, and again, if you were interested in reading this report, we could share it, that art can lead to a decrease in eco-anxiety and so many more anxieties that our society is facing. Art can not only translate science into compelling stories, but it can improve our well-being and it can support climate justice to reshape our narratives, as many narratives we all have. So this was from me on the research, but over to you, maybe Mikey, to add a few words on the educational level.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think the big takeaway, and that's why I asked the question, is how much of this stuff is leaking out from these silos. There's great work being done, people reimagining the relationship of art and research and rivers and all this different stuff. I don't exist in that world, so I'm constantly trying to see where the cracks are and if we can widen those cracks. So huge kudos to all 3 Jameel organizations for creating these types of spaces to widen the cracks and let more of this information get out there. So that's my big takeaway. I think we can wrap up.
We can wrap up. This was Community Jameel and afikra
Yeah.
live conversation at COP28. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Before you guys head out, I think it would be good just for each person to say like one sentence. Where can people find your work? Where can they actually look you up online if they have other questions that they're too timid to ask right now? So just please go ahead.
Okay, I have a WordPress, which is Nadia Isa at wordpress.com, I think. But you can also find me on the MIT website, where you'll be able to find my email if you want to follow up. I love talking to people, so I'm always happy to have a conversation with anyone that wants to talk.
Our website is jameelartshealthlab.org. The new website will be launched next year alongside the policy brief. On the
Beautiful one.
on the beautiful, both of them, website and policy brief. On Sunday, we are having an arts, health, and climate panel in the Green Zone. It's free. You just have to register with Arts and Health Lead at the WHO, Christopher Bailey, Rafiq Anadol, who I'm sure you know, the data artist, Manal Ataya from Sharjah Museums Authority, and Princess Mashal Al-Shalan. And there'll be great visuals, and we will really make it worth your while if you come. So please come to that. That's free. That's 1 p.m. Sunday, the 3rd of December in the Green Zone. And you can find details on our Instagram.
And for us, you can go to artjameel.org, which will have information about all our sort of different initiatives, both here in the UAE and in Saudi and globally as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.